Evening, and welcome to our Take Back the Night rally. We're so glad that you're here with us. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to sharing this experience with you tonight. My name is Lisa Skeens. I am an associate professor of social work at the Lancaster campus, and I have worked with OUL for quite a while. I have also been part of the Take Back the Night through different organizations and working with students. And it's a pleasure to be your moderator tonight. So I will be taking questions and helping you through the process for whatever you might need. So the first order of business, I would like to let you know that if you have questions and you would like to speak with the panel as we get into our panel discussion, please feel free to write those questions in the chat. Or you may also, I wanted to let you know that we have our program posted in the chat as well, if you would like to follow along with that. So I'm not sure if all of you have participated in Take Back the Night before. Some of you may be new to the event and understanding the organization. I thought I would take a few moments and go through and help you understand some things from their foundation page and read some brief summaries about their mission and the history of Take Back the Night so you have an understanding. Take Back the Night is a foundation to end
Hey, Lisa, you accidentally muted yourself.
Okay, so the foundation raises awareness through events and initiatives. So people of all backgrounds around the world are taking back their voices by speaking out against these crimes and taking a stand through the Take Back the Night. Sexual violence, harassment, abuse, stalking, and trafficking continue in epidemic proportions. We've made great strides, but the march is far from over, and the foundation continues to raise awareness and gain support. A very brief history of Take Back the Night. It is the earliest worldwide movement to stand against sexual violence. Take Back the Night events began in the 1960s in Belgium and England with protests about women not feeling safe walking down the street alone at night. In 1973, in the United States, a group of women at the University of Southern Florida, dressed in black sheets, held broomsticks, and marched through campus demanding a women's center. In 1975, a crowd in Philadelphia had a Take Back the Night event to protest the murder of a microbiologist walking home after work. In the 70s, San Francisco had a number of rallies and protests of snuff pornography and violence against women. These early protests sparked hundreds of events on college campuses and in communities of all sizes and locations, all hoping to bring awareness to sexual violence and provide support for victims. More and more communities have since joined the movement around the world to hold events related to their goals of support and awareness. We now reach, as an organization, and Take Back the Night reaches millions of people each year. So this evening, we are going to hear survivor stories. We're going to have a panel discussion with some of our regional experts in the areas of domestic violence, sexual assault, and interpersonal violence. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we'll end the evening with a candlelight vigil. So at this point, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to our first survivor story. Thank you, and again, welcome.
Hi, my name is Jen. I currently live in Fairfield County. I'm originally from the Pittsburgh area, but I've lived pretty much everywhere up and down the East Coast throughout my life. So I had this best friend growing up. We were probably friends from the time we were about 7 years old. When I turned 14, things turned to a little bit more serious, as junior high kids tend to do. Didn't work. We went back to just being friends until I started dating somebody else. Things took a turn for the worse, and that's when he started verbally assaulting me, which then turned to being physically assaulted. By the time I was 16, he had broken my orbital bone. I had a broken jaw, a broken arm, broken ribs, I had had a miscarriage. He made my life a living hell. He was a police officer's son, so that wasn't an option. He was the star of the football team, so the school worshipped football players, so that was no help to me. My parents didn't know what to do with me because at first I wouldn't tell them what was going on. I was ashamed. I thought it was my fault because it's just the way you are. You think that it's your fault. By the time I was 16, he had put me in the hospital. I was there for 2 days. That's when we finally pressed charges, but of course they didn't stick, and it is what it is. I started counseling. Did not take the first 2, 3, 4 times that I went. It wasn't until I met my current husband that I finally started to feel some peace. He helped me realize that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't done anything wrong, and that there could be something more than just being a victim. So fast forward 2 years, I finally graduate. I managed to make it through the rest of high school. We'll just call him the jerk, kept to himself on one side of the school. He was into sports, I wasn't. I made sure that my class schedule didn't meet. I didn't take some of the classes that I wanted to, just so I didn't have to be accidentally running into them. I switched lunches. I would eat in my car. Back then you were allowed to leave campus, so it didn't matter. So I would hide out in my car and eat. Didn't have much of a social life outside of school for fear of running into them. By the time I graduated, I moved, went away to school. That's when things really started to get better. I distanced myself from the area where I grew up. Still don't go back very often because he still lives in that hometown. And that's pretty much the only thing that still triggers me is being in that hometown. Since that experience, I have learned how to love myself again, and I've learned how to trust people again, because it took a very long time for me to trust people. And then from there, I finally decided that I wanted to be a social worker. And so I am currently working on my master's degree for mental health counseling, because I want to help other people realize that just because this happened to you, it's not the end of the world. It sucks. Most likely we'll never get over it. Everyone that says time heals all wounds, they lie. It doesn't. But it does get easier. Speak up. I kept it hidden for 2 years, which I think helped. I don't want to say caused some of the issue, but if I would have spoke up the very first time it happened and then spoke up again and spoke up again, more people wouldn't have been able to ignore what was going on. I think letting people know that it's a safe space. Like I said, I didn't go to my school counselor or the school nurse because I didn't feel safe. I felt like I'd be judged. And I think that over the last 20 plus years, mental health has lost some of its stigma. There's still huge miles away from completely getting rid of that stigma, but just letting people know that it's okay, it's not your fault, and that when you go to get help, they're not going to judge you.
I'm tired of waiting. I've slowly been losing my patience. I'd like to inspire some change. We're trying to find our voice, hoping that someone will listen and hear us, so children don't have the same fate. We're fighting for something worth justice. We're fighting for a plague upon us, a plague that affects everyone I know. Me too, me too. I would like to change this too. I would like to feel as though we're safe. Me too, me too. I would like to see this through. We have power in the mess we've made. So come on, keep fighting. We're fighting for something worth justice. We're fighting for a plague upon us, so children don't have the same fate. We're trying to change a world we know, a world that can make us feel so small, a world that could turn its back on survivors. Me too, me too. I would like to change this too. I would like to feel as though we're safe. Stand tall, stand tall. I was once made very small. We won't let the future know our pain. Me too, me too. I would like to see this through. We have power in the mess we've made. So come on, keep fighting.
Well, my name is Shannon Lawson. I live in Logan and I work in Lancaster on the mobile crisis team. And I'm a jail therapist as well. I'm an MSW, LSW. I'm currently working on my independent licensure. I have 4 children. I am married to my second husband. We've been married for 21 years. So my story is pretty long ago. But I am the person I am today because of it. So, well, I guess to start from the beginning, I met my ex-husband when I was in college the first time, when I left right after high school. We got married, and about 6 months after we got married, he started hitting. And at first I just made excuses because that's what we do. It just got worse from there. And then when I got pregnant with our son, it intensified. We had thought that he was a girl, and that angered my ex-husband. So he pushed me down a spiral staircase to try to get me to lose the baby. Thankfully, that didn't happen. And we have a beautiful son. When Jacob was 8 months old, I finally decided it was time to leave. We got into an argument one night about him going to work, and he smacked me and hit me so hard in the face that he almost busted my eye, my orbit. Almost broke the bone, I guess is what I could say. But when he hit me, I was nursing our son. So if he had just a half an inch down, he would have hit the baby. And I knew then that it was time to go, and there was no staying. So about 3 days later, my whole family in Indiana, I had 5 aunts, uncles, 6 cousins, swooped into our little house in Fortville and moved me out. My family is from, my parents were in Ohio, and at the time that I left my ex-husband, Indiana had grandparents' rights, and my ex-husband's mother filed an injunction, so I couldn't leave the state with our son until our divorce was final. So I had to stay with family in Indiana. And that was really hard because I couldn't be with my parents. But I had a lot of support. And I'm so grateful that they were there for me and helped me get out, because I know eventually he would have killed me. He tried a few times. The first time was with a telephone cord. He was choking me. When I tried to get up to call the police, he ripped the cord out of the wall and wrapped around my neck a few times and was choking me. And someone knocked on the door, thank God. And his brother came out and saw what was going on, and he immediately stopped because he didn't like to do that in front of his brother, even though his brother knew what was going on. So I know that eventually he would have killed me, and I'm just glad that I was able to get out when I did. And I know that going through those things they were horrible at the time, but they have made me who I am today. I'm much stronger than I was. And I understand how hard it is to get out. And I understand wanting to fix someone and change someone so badly because you love them and you think that they love you. I understand how that makes you feel. And I just think that having the right support is the best way to get out. I don't really want to cry, so I'm going to stop here because it brings back a lot. But I am super proud of who I am today, and I know I wouldn't be this way had I not gone through those things. They made me stronger, and I'm thankful that I made it out alive. We can survive. We can do it. It's scary, but with the right support, you can get out, and you can get by, and you can recover. Listen and don't push. And if you see something, say something. I think that it's great that this event happens every year, and I think it's very empowering, and I'm very pleased to be able to do this.
Thank you, Jen and Shannon. We appreciate you sharing your stories and your resiliency. Hearing survivors' stories can feel quite bittersweet. We hear the pain and the suffering and all of the trauma involved, but at the same time, we also hear stories of resiliency and transcending that pain and finding meaning in the pain and actually being able to advocate and share and support others through that pain. So it is definitely a mix of emotions hearing this, and it really stops and makes us think. And unfortunately, most of us can probably relate on a personal level, either having experienced some form of violence or knowing someone that we love or care about, friends or family who have experienced violence. We know from the Take Back the Night Foundation that 1 in 3 women will experience sexual or intimate partner violence. 1 out of 2 transgender people have been a victim of sexual assaults, and less than 50% of victims report crimes. So it hits very close to home for all of us in different ways. So I do appreciate, again, that you're here to support this, and we would like to shift gears a little bit and begin the introductions for our panel. We are very excited to have some wonderful community leaders with us tonight. And what I'd like to do is read a biography for each panelist. And when I'm done with the biography, if they would like to share their own message, their thoughts, and share some of their experiences with us, we'll go through the different panelists and do that. When we're through learning about the panelists and going through their biographies, we'll go ahead and do some panel questions and also invite you to participate and ask questions through the chat. So our first panelist is Captain Will Tully. And where is Captain Tully? I think trying to find people on here. I know he's joining us. There we go. Welcome.
Hi there.
Welcome. Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, and Captain Will Tully is a Patrol Bureau Commander for the Lancaster Police Department. He has nearly 30 years of experience as a local law enforcement officer, working previously for the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office, the Fairfield Medical Center, and has been with the LPD for 27 years. In addition to his patrol experience, he has served as a supervisor for the Community Services Unit, commander of the Special Response Team, and as the commander of the Detective Bureau. He has responded to hundreds of calls for service involving people in crisis or participants in violence within the Lancaster and surrounding communities. Tully also has an associate's, bachelor's, and master's degree in law enforcement and justice administration. He's a certified law enforcement executive and has attended the Police Executive Leadership College. He was formally certified as a crisis intervention instructor for the Ohio Peace Officer Training Commission. And thank you so much for making time for us. I know that your work schedule is very complicated and you are doing work in the community constantly, even as we speak. So thank you so much for being with us. And if you'd like to share some thoughts and your message as we continue through the evening, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to comment throughout the program if you'd like. One of the things that I can tell you is that by no means am I an expert in any of the things that we'll talk about tonight, but I've been around a long time, as you can tell by 30 years in the profession. So I've had an opportunity to speak to plenty of victims, plenty of suspects, witnesses, and children involved, and all sorts of things. So one of the first things I wanted to say right out of the gate is that, like you mentioned, I really am proud of the victims that share their stories in events and things like we're having tonight with the Take Back the Night message. It's super important for all of us to get behind those victims, especially the children, and to back them when they have the situation that they're in. We don't know all the things that go on behind the scenes, but I can say from all of that experience that there are some really nasty things that go on, not only in our community, but throughout this country. And it truly does take all of us working together to try to help support them, get them through, and bring them to the place where they can be kind of empowered themselves, and where they can feel like, you know what, I matter and I'm stronger because of what I went through. And it's sad that they have to go through that to figure that out, but we're certainly here to support them. Definitely myself, I can speak to that. I can tell you that most of the officers I know, they get into this business because they want to help. And that's kind of that's something that everyone says, especially when they're interviewing for this position. But I can tell you that it's true, that most officers believe, the vast majority of them want to help you. They want to help you get through whatever it is you're going through. And that's why we do what we do. So I thank you for having this program. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I'll try to weigh in any possible way that I can throughout the night. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you so much. You know, I was just telling my students the other week how lucky we are to be in a community where the police department is so invested in mental health and safety and family safety. And it's a very unique community, I think, especially not being from the area. And it really is an advantage for the whole community that we can collaborate and work together. And we appreciate your work and your concern. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'll introduce our next panelist, Jennifer Seifert. Jennifer is up there in the corner. Hello, she's the executive director of the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program, which is a dual rape crisis center and domestic violence program that serves 8 rural Appalachian counties in Southeast Ohio. She was born and raised in Fairfield County, Ohio, and obtained her undergraduate degree in communication studies from Ohio University, Lancaster. She went on to earn a Master of Arts in Communication Studies and graduate certificate in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from West Virginia University, and a PhD in Communication Studies from Ohio University, specializing in persuasion and sexuality studies. In addition to her administrative and direct service duties at SAOP, she conducts and oversees the violence prevention programming in regional schools, organizations, and businesses. Her work is vitally important in fighting sexual assault. And it's nice to see you again, Jen. And I know that you've been part of this program and have done very meaningful work with this population, and you're an alumni, so you make OU proud, and we're glad to have you. So if you'd like to tell us about your message and your thoughts, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, so I can make it really short and sweet in that, I'm currently the director of the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program. We say SOP for short, not to be confused with SOAP, although it's shockingly similar. And we believe that everyone has the right to a life free of sexual violence. So we do this work in our communities by educating folks about their options, empowering them to make choice and enact lives that are free of violence. And we now have recently added an additional county to our service area. So now we cover 9 counties in Southeast Ohio, and we deploy a slightly different approach to advocacy, which I think is an interesting, might weave into our discussion this evening, but we do mobile advocacy. And what that means is, unlike a lot of shelter programs, our advocates are on the ground, in the field, in the community, helping survivors mobilize resources. So it's a lot more like service coordination or case management, and our folks are out in the field, so we get really kind of interesting perspectives of, what's happening on the ground, because our staff are on the ground with our survivors trying to troubleshoot and problem solve and access services. So I hope that kind of bubbles up in our discussion here. But just want to add that I grew up in Fairfield County, did a lot of work in Fairfield County as well. So while I might be talking most broadly in my professional sense about Southeast Ohio, I think a lot of this does often transfer because there are some similarities between Fairfield County and many of the communities that we serve. We serve Hocking and Perry County as well. So it's just like we're neighbors in many ways.
Thank you, Jen. We're grateful to have you in the community in this region. We need you. And also just your understanding of even this county and some of the dynamics that you bring are very meaningful to us. So we look forward to talking about some of those subjects that you had just mentioned. So thank you again. And I'd like to introduce Deborah Nichols, who is an associate professor of instruction in English at Ohio University, Chillicothe. She's been teaching and an interdisciplinary instructor for the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Department since 2006. In 2015, she co-authored an e-reader with Dr. Lisa Wallace titled Unlearning, Challenging Assumptions About Women, Gender, and Sexuality through Kendall Hunt. Her chapter, Recognizing Intimate Partner Violence, focused on challenging many assumptions and stereotypes society carries about those who are impacted by domestic violence. So Deborah, if you'd like to share your message with us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I'm really honored to be here tonight with you folks, especially with my fellow panelists Captain Tully, I really appreciated what you said about not being an expert, even though you have 30 years of experiencing what you do in the community. And I just really value that type of stance. I've been teaching for about 20 years, and I certainly feel as if I'm no expert. And Jen, I really appreciated what you had to say about making sure that women are empowered to know that they should be able to live lives without violence. That just seems like such a powerful statement for tonight that we need to think about. Um, I have a poem that a friend of mine shared on Facebook a couple days ago, and I will let her remain anonymous, but I'd like to read her poem here. She starts, "My home will be a home with no loud anger, no explosive rage, no shaming or slamming doors or breaking glass, no name calling, shaming, or blackmail. My home will be gentle. It will be warm. It will keep my loved ones safe. No fear, no hurt, and no worries. I may come from a broken and twisted place, but I will build something whole and safe. I'll sing in the shower again, cook with a smile, and dance in all the rooms. I will heal." And my friend is 47, and she says it has taken her a long while, but she's getting there. And I think that's beautiful, and I wanted to share it with you. I actually prepared a couple of things to say. Of course, I'm an instructor, so I've got a lot to say. And I was given 10 minutes, to share. So I think I will go ahead and just kind of read from my notes. Hopefully, they will speak and resonate to people who are listening tonight. So again, I just want to thank you for letting me to step in. It's an honor to share information on such an important topic that does impact one out of 3 to 4 people in a spectrum of ways. Take Back the Night is an important tradition where people can gather together to share stories. As we heard earlier, research, affirmation, love, and perhaps most of all, community care. And that's what I'm seeing here tonight. It's an honor to be with first responders and people dedicated to serving their communities. As a teacher, I feel like I serve regional students in different ways than first responders. I'm mostly in an English class or I'm teaching in a WGSS course. But when I teach sections on women resisting violence, I spend a lot of time looking at the language, emphasizing that how we as people, family, local communities, and even nationally, how we define violence matters. And there are all sorts of types of violence out there. And I don't mean for there to be a hierarchy on this list, but I wanted to expand a little bit what we might be thinking of in terms of violence tonight. So yes, there is absolutely intimate partner violence. There's also non-partner sexual violence, including unwanted touching, harassment, coercion, sexual assault, incest, and rape. And how we use these words matter. There's physical violence, shoving, slapping, pinching, restraining, and injuries too. Some really deep injuries that we heard from the stories at the beginning of the program. There's also emotional and psychological abuse, including verbal abuse, control, isolating, discrediting, silencing, and gaslighting. Gaslighting is a term that I'm hearing from my students quite often this semester, as we're trying to give language to our experiences so that we can share those experiences more meaningfully. There's also economic abuse, right? So financial control, limiting resources, preventing work in school, and coerced debt. And then there's bullying, trafficking, stalking, self-harm, eroticized violence, a whole other topic, dating violence, sometimes called mutual violence, and cybercrime as well. So I think that the language that we use to describe the harm that we do to each other, this violence that comes from a desire to control or have power over, is constantly changing and being redefined, but the stakes are high. Definitions matter for two reasons. Number one, our laws and our policies, and they're constantly changing. And number two, people themselves, individuals, must be able to recognize and identify violence in their own homes and communities. And definitely, I too have my own stories to tell, and I won't share them tonight necessarily, but it took me a long while to recognize the violence in my own home, also back in the day. So the victim narrative, though, I wanted to say in terms of language, can also be harmful, using the word victim, because there is no typical victim. And I think that's why sometimes it's hard to recognize when we have violence in our own lives. There's a wide spectrum of people from different races, classes, gender, sexual orientations. All sorts of people can experience different violence in their own homes. And the victim word itself can be problematic, because so many young people today do not want that label, and they don't see themselves as a victim. And I think that's maybe something that we want to talk about tonight, but the idea of being a victim, there are victims, but how we use that word also matters. So recognizing violence and abuse is essential. Many times we struggle with cultural norms from our region and even from our individual families, especially in terms of generational violence, and different forms of violence, especially non-visible ones without bruises, may be hard for us to see for a lot of reasons. So when I'm teaching and I talk about these things, I use a reading from Del Martin and her partner, Phyllis Lyons, like from the 50s, right? They co-founded Daughters of Bilitis in San Francisco. So they worked on domestic violence issues too back in the day. Del Martin published an anonymous letter from a woman that I still use in 2021 about the reasons why women might not recognize the violence in their lives, and the reasons why they might not necessarily leave violent situations, as we heard from stories earlier tonight. Some of those reasons still ring true today, and I'd like to just give voice to them. There are financial reasons, fears that no one will believe them, that they will be accused of drama, fear of law enforcement not caring and not helping, fear and no faith that anything will actually be done, no faith that anyone cares. There's fear of death, we heard tonight, with death threats, no child support, people who have been isolated from friends and family and community, so they literally have nowhere to go. There are people who understand the situation they're in, and they also understand that our laws and our policies are weak. And of course, there's embarrassment and shame. Our pets can be threatened. And there's also sometimes confusion about romantic love. And for many people, there's simply no real alternatives. They can't imagine a life outside of the one that they're living. So I just want to say too, that we see these cultural cycles today in a lot of current movies and TV series about abuse. So those narratives, like Shameless, Big Little Lies with Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman. There's a new program on Netflix right now called Made, which is really interesting, working with abuse. And there are oldies like Titanic, The Shining, The Color Purple, The Great Gatsby, tons of books out there. The list goes on, and violence has always been a heavy part of American culture, right? So with violence being the norm of everyday life, it's hard to admit and recognize the violence that you might be in terms of an unhealthy relationship, right? But recognizing that is so important. So in Ross County, I think domestic violence often gets tangled up with the stigma of drug abuse, poverty, and mental health. And some of those entanglements are certainly legitimate, absolutely. But again, I go back to one of my previous points. Domestic violence can impact anyone. So we have actually, I started to say we have lots of resources here in Ross County, but actually we don't. We have 3 primary resources. We have law enforcement, and we have the Victim Witness Assistant Program at the Chillicothe Municipal Court. We have ADINA, our medical center, and the Survivor Advocacy Program there. And then we have the Ross County Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I was just talking with my panelists before the program that these here in Ross County are so underfunded and so understaffed, especially in terms of COVID, when our most vulnerable people were isolated more than ever before. And of course, our first responders could not always function fully. And with low report rates always being an issue, our community is definitely challenged. So for me, I want to advocate for, of course, more education. I think we can fit these topics slowly into, yes, K-12, certainly at the university level. I'd like to see Ohio University expand its Women and Gender Studies program back to the regional campus. I think that having these discussions in class are important. And having said that, I'm excited this semester that even in a class like freshman composition, where I'm asking people to go ahead and pick topics that they want to write about for their first paper, I have plenty of young women who are far more savvy and engaged in these issues than ever before. And they are choosing to do their research papers on these topics. So where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah, so that was a lot, but I think it's important. And thank you so much for giving me time to put those ideas out there.
Deborah, I'm so thrilled that you joined us this year. You have so many meaningful points. I wish that we could respond to each and every one of them, and your points about communication and language and even being aware, what are the definitions? And you did such a wonderful job explaining the subcategories and the major categories of all these different things that people don't even recognize. And it's so encouraging when I hear an interdisciplinary perspective. When you have English professors working with social work professors and psych professors and women and gender studies, this is how we really reach people, is by forming that community. So, what you said was so meaningful on so many levels. So we really appreciate the work you're doing, and your students are lucky to have you, for sure. Thank you so much. So at this point, we have one or two questions from the participants. So we'll get to that. And there was one question I'd like to start by asking everyone in the panel, if you'd be so kind to answer, and then we'll get to our participant questions. One question is, how does interpersonal violence affect the entire community, if you look at it from a societal or community perspective? And any order's fine, just jump on in.
Sure, I could start. Sure. So I think that there is, if I were to kind of drive at what I think you might be hoping would unfold from asking this question, is that a lot of times intimate partner violence or domestic violence gets confined within the relationship, right? That it's something that occurs just between those two people, or it's a family issue, and that it's really about individual deviance. And I'm using deviance in terms of, we have a perpetrator and we have a survivor, and certainly those things are true. But when we isolate it within, because those people happen to be in other relationships with families, those people also happen to be in churches and workplaces and these other organizations or, community type spaces. And they also live in neighborhoods. And then we all kind of live in this broader society. And it's really, it's so zooming in too specifically to think that whatever is occurring in that relationship among those two individuals doesn't radiate. And so some of the most salient, immediate folks that it radiates to are children and youth that are in that household, then other family members. We might call those folks co-survivors. So individuals who love and care for someone who might be experiencing intimate partner violence. But if we want to nest it just broadly within economic terms, in the United States, Forbes magazine estimates that domestic violence and intimate partner violence costs the United States approximately $8.3 billion a year. That's billion with a B. And 5.8 billion of that is direct medical costs and mental health needs and public services like EMS and law enforcement. And then the other 2.5 billion they estimate is in lost productivity. So people unable to engage in work activities and et cetera. So, I would just say most broadly, but also too, when we talk about what something costs and we're putting that in a dollar amount, that is, again, a very kind of not effective way to capture what is for some folks a lifetime of consequences in terms of sometimes increased chronic health conditions. And I won't go into adverse childhood experiences and this little riff, soapbox, whatever one would call it. But the short answer is it radiates to our other community members, it radiates into our workplaces, and it radiates into the broader society. And turning a blind eye and refusing to talk about it or address it directly doesn't make it disappear. Actually, it can make the situation worse when we create these environments where people can't reach out for help or talk about it without being blamed and shamed. That creates the secrecy and the environments when this type of violence can thrive.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. That's an excellent response to a very wide question. So thank you so much. And Captain Tully or Deborah, I don't know if you had anything you'd like to offer about how the community is affected by violence.
I think Jen really hit it. Just the entire structure of that, and the cost is emotional for each individual, and the energy, it drains away and sucks away energy from our communities as well. Jen, I loved your answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Captain, anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I think that was a pretty good answer as well. That definitely made me think about some of the costs of how far it goes out, and I know, obviously, I know the administrative costs we have from our own agency, but boy, when you really take this problem at a grand scale, it affects everyone monetarily and obviously emotionally, and in relationships and all sorts of things. But boy, putting a kind of a number to the issue, that's pretty mind-boggling, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. And we do have a few questions that have come in, and I'd like to offer the panel a question from our participants. One question is, how can you support someone who has shared a story with you about being abused in their relationship? How can you be of support? And whoever feels inspired, if you have thoughts on that, whether it's a professional, doesn't have to be necessarily a clinical response, but looking at
Sure.
social support and community.
Sure. I'll hop in on this one because there's two kind of key features. I would say the first is non-judgment, and that is hard because oftentimes someone who has chosen to share with you, it's probably because they perceive you as a trusted individual in their life. Perhaps you're close, maybe a best friend or brother, sister, something like that. And it can be really hard for us as individuals hearing a disclosure to really listen without judgment and not try to direct that person and try to tell them what they should do, and to truly listen without letting our own, I call it trash, but I don't know how it's our own our own feelings about that situation creep in, because we can find ourselves responding because of our own feelings and less about the individuals. And then I would also just share, and I know that it's really hard, to really deploy what we call radical support. It is being there, it is showing up every single time. Okay, so this is domestic violence specific, but it takes an average of 7 times for a survivor to be successful in separating completely from that relationship. And what we often see is the people that surround that person get exhausted, right? By hearing these disclosures, they think this person should just leave, and, but it's really complicated. And I won't unpack all the dynamics here, but often there's economic exploitation, there's abuse, there's often trauma bonding, all of these things that can make it really difficult to leave. So the most radical thing that you can do is absolutely refuse to give up that relationship with that person, and do whatever you need to do internally. Talk to a friend, talk to your therapist, whatever you need to do to discharge. Because if you don't, what could happen is that person becomes further isolated, and then they don't have the support that they need. So I know that we often can really put a lot of pressure on ourselves to know like the right thing to say, when someone shares it. But honestly, you can say, I don't know what to say. I'm so glad that you told me, and I'd love to hear more and love to support you in whatever way feels the best right now. And know that I will always be here no matter what, no matter how hard it gets. And realize that, make it happen. Refuse to give up on that person, because they will need you. And them separating from that relationship is going to be incredibly difficult.
I love the idea of radical support. That sounds, it, it's so true what you say. And I appreciate you saying this for the students who are listening, if they're going into a field of working with women or working with families and violence, that it's a process. And you're right, it's so complicated. And we don't spend enough time talking about how to form allies and support. And without that, the support for the people who are supporting, it's very hard to stay connected and to continue to offer that person that unconditional regard. So yeah, excellent points. Thank you so much for that. And I don't know if anyone else had a thought on that, how to reach people. No? Okay, I have another question from the audience. And this is kind of a touching question. Those of us who knew our dear colleague, Michael Ashton, who passed away last year suddenly, who was he was a little bit of everything. In the community, he was a clinical director at New Horizons. He was a social work adjunct professor. He was human services professor. He was a counselor on campus. So many of our lives were touched by him, and we're still grieving his loss. And someone was kind enough to bring up his memory and said, "We lost Professor Michael Ashton earlier this year. While he gave us all many great memories, it would be a tragedy for us to forget his contribution to our conversations at Take Back the Night every year. Professor Ashton was always apt to let us not forget the importance of men to understand their role and responsibility in the prevention of gender violence, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. The panel can feel free to address this point, but I just wanted to make sure we honor Professor Ashton's memory by being responsible, especially men, and challenging the urge to treat these problems as strictly a women's issue." So I appreciate you bringing up his memory. And I have a memory of Michael, I think it was 2 years ago, and he would get so passionate. And I remember one time he was so angry, just so angry at the pain that he cried very openly in front of people, and was able to model that sort of that emotional expression from men, and just had no shame about it. And it was such a beautiful experience, I think, for people to see, and making, understanding men's issues and their accountability. So I'm not sure that, it's necessarily a question. I appreciate that honoring, because we need more of that modeling and more of that support for sure. So, in regard to men being responsible, I don't know if folks have comments about that, different ways to reach men with responsibility, with care, with support. If anyone would like to comment on that.
Well, I see that Dr. Kaler has a message in the chat, and a couple questions that I'd like to bounce off from. Definitely. When are we going to start having language that challenges how men are socialized? And when are we going to start telling them, don't rape, and start socializing boys away from violence? These are essential questions. And I think one of the reasons my folks in my classes, that the younger people are coming to class, they're coming to class with more ideas, because we are seeing memes on social media expressing these values, right? So I'm trying to think of one of the most popular memes talks about toxic masculinity. So since we were able to give that language, give that a term, the younger folks are kind of playing with that and trying to understand what that might mean. And they bring that to class. And I think that's one term that we're using. And I'm seeing a lot of things on social media that might start off on one column telling women how to behave so that they are not raped, what to wear, not walking at night, etc., etc. And then those things are crossed out. And instead, we are telling boys not to rape, and using that word, that volatile word that makes people uncomfortable, you know, if you're talking to 12-year-olds. Yeah, so I think that's very important, and I think that's where we're headed. So thanks, Dr. Kaler, for bringing that up.
Deborah, while I have you there was a question specifically for you, if you wouldn't mind answering. The question is, I'm glad that you brought up the Netflix series, The Maid, as it has been trending on social media. Do you see films likewise impacting survivors and increase the likelihood on speaking up for help?
Yes, I saw that as well. Films are so complicated. They challenge what we think as a society. They mirror what's going on, and sometimes they reinforce, you know, what we fear and stereotypes as well. So with Maid, I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but I've heard how it ends. No spoilers, no one worry about that. But the ending, I think, might be controversial. What I was really impressed with the first episode was Alex discovering that she does have an opportunity to go to a shelter. And she's talking with a caseworker after she has escaped an abusive relationship with her daughter. And she has nothing. And she's talking with the caseworker, and the caseworker asks her if she believes that she's a victim of domestic violence. And if so, she can go to this shelter. So there's a moment when this young person has to think, you know, am I a victim? Is what happened truly domestic violence? There were no scratches, no bruises, nothing visible on her body. And I think that moment captured in cinema is really important. How it plays out in other ways is kind of strange. It seems to maybe romanticize some of the issues that Alex, as a white woman, goes through in her society as a maid. So yeah, very complicated stuff.
I'm looking forward to watching that too. My students continue to talk about it and ask me if I've seen it. So I've got to put that on there. Another question. I'm so glad we have questions coming in. Another question. I know someone who tried to teach classes about consent to her first graders, and she got told to stop using the word consent and use a child appropriate, quote, word like space invader. Oh, that's interesting. Why do you think there is such pushback against teaching consent and using that specific word? How can we challenge that? That's a great question.
I can answer. I can take a shot at this one, but I'm trying to like make it a little less pointed. It is like 7 o'clock in the evening, and I've been, I'm like, boy, I might need to pull this back a little bit. But honestly, I think the reservations are tied up with shame that, because when we're young, if we don't teach healthy sexuality to young people, those young people become adults and become older people that also have children. And I think that a lot of the hesitations about teaching sex and sexuality to young people has to do not only with the blame and shame that's essentially tends to be tied with sexuality more broadly, but sexual assault and sexual violence more specifically is incredibly taboo. So anything that gets coupled with that, I think, is really hard for adults to grapple with. I teach consent to my own children. I teach classes as young as kindergarten, and kids get it. I mean, of course, it has to be age appropriate, but it's very easy for young kids to understand their bodies, their boundaries. And so you can use language that's more appropriate for young folks. But sadly, the other layer is often this is deeply embedded in people's value systems, and parents and caregivers often have totally understandable, strong feelings about who gets to teach their youth or children they're caring for about these topics. And so, yeah, consent, tends to get coupled with this movement a little more broadly, but there are ways and language that you can use that even abstracts it a little further. You can talk about boundaries. You can talk about permission. That's usually, words and language that youth understand. But this work is incredibly difficult to do in schools and in broad groups, again, just because of the shame that's often tied in our culture to sex and sexuality, and then the values components, because it is deeply intertwined with different folks' values, and that can make it difficult. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I'm like, it's about the parents, right? Kids don't, it's just, if you can make it age appropriate, then it's, they get it, right? They, because you can use examples that have nothing to do with sex and sexuality in terms of sharing toys, or, there's just so many ways that you can approach it that don't include talking about sexuality. It's just, if you talk about it, then parents assume, oh, they're talking to my kids about rape, and maybe we might be, right, if they're college age students or something like that, but certainly not the little ones. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question I would like to ask the panel is, how is COVID affecting domestic violence in our area?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the region, if that feels okay. And I can use data from our organization. So we are on track to serve 2.5 times the number of DV survivors in pandemic years than non-pandemic years. And the reason for that is, I'll share in the chat, there are very predictable risk and protective factors. So when I talk about risk factors, these are individual, community, or relationship level features that can increase an individual's likelihood of experiencing intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Some primary ones are unemployment, isolation, right? Economic instability, intense economic pressure. And I will share this, but you can look at that list and see an indirect effect of a lot of the stay-at-home orders and different effects intensified this, and then translated it into more abuse in the home. And beyond that, and this is just anecdotal, but our staff are talking pretty regularly. And I believe, I can't remember your title. Is it Chief Tolley? Might be able to speak on this as well, but we're seeing far more intensity. We do lethality assessments with many of our folks that call, and we're having many more survivors screen in at high lethality. And these are questions that are designed to predict someone's likelihood of being murdered by their partner. And it includes strangulation, threatening with weapons, some other features. And we have many more survivors screening in at higher lethality. And just anecdotally, the situations they're describing are far more intense. We would have, pretty high intensity case a couple times a year, and now we're getting 3 or 4 a month. In terms of, I can't go into very much detail because we're a confidential resource, but just some really horrific circumstances that are being described that I believe is not a direct result, but certainly an indirect result of the dynamics and situations that are being intensified due to the pandemic.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. And I don't know, Captain Tully, do you have any thoughts on, the frequency of calls, or have you seen any changes in the patterns?
Yeah, I can tell you that at least locally, our calls for domestic violence and I guess sexually related violence and that type of thing actually decreased at the beginning of it, of the pandemic, but it has increased quite a bit since then. I ran some statistics from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, and this is just between July of 20 and July of 21. It included 85 victims and 46 perpetrators that were killed in domestic violence cases. 34% of those cases were suicide by the perpetrator. 20% of the perpetrators had previous DV charges or convictions. And what was shocking to me is that 6 of the cases had pending DV related charges. So in other words, they were already in the process and had committed domestic violence against someone, had a charge, and were still out on that charge. So they had already been at least charged with domestic violence, maybe not necessarily convicted, but we have to work a little bit closer with the prosecutors and the judges to make sure that people that have a propensity for violence are going to remain in jail if we can't treat them somehow. But there's a few other statistics as well. 121 cases involve those killed or injured with guns. That's pretty significant. 18% of the cases involve children at the scene. And to speak to what we've been talking about, in at least 27% of fatality cases, the victim of an intimate partner violence had ended or was ending the relationship. So they were trying to get out or may have even actually gotten out, but there was such a, I don't know, there was the person who committed the violence was so bent on getting to that victim that even after they had broken up or were moving on with their life, they were still pursuing them to some extent. So that's a pretty significant statistic as well. One of the brighter notes, at least from my end, is that no law enforcement officers were killed by a batterer for the second time since 2015. And I can tell you from my experience, even when I first started in law enforcement, that was always high priority for us when we respond to any type of violence, but especially domestic violence, that is a heightened sense of security for us. Because I can give you kind of a anecdotal example. When I was in training, I rode with the Columbus Police Department, and I responded as just a civilian rider to a active domestic violence case. And in that course, a woman had been severely beaten, and the officers were attempting to arrest the perpetrator, and the woman turned on them and picked up a lamp and started beating one of the police officers that was trying to arrest her husband. So I know that sounds crazy, but it's amazing the familial and relationship ties that people have. And it's very difficult for them to get out of the situation because of that. I think we all know that, when you're dealing with family or someone that you have either blood or some other type of relationship with, that it's very difficult to move on from that. And that's part of why we're here, is to try to help and support people to get them out of the situation. And that's why at least laws in Ohio are kind of helpful in that way, because it's not just the blood relationship that's covered in that we can kind of maneuver throughout that statute to be able to include people that are just in relationships or have been in relationships in the past. But it's pretty clear that the pandemic has really affected people inside their homes. I think they're home together a lot more. They're not out and about kind of venting, I guess you'd say. I don't know what the proper way of approaching that is, but they don't have all the outs that they normally do. And it shows. I can tell you also from experience that holidays always bring that same thing. When people mix either just attitudes or attitudes coupled with impairment of some sort, whether that's drugs or alcohol, it's never good for people to get together that have major problems already. And when they do, this is what happens.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I can't imagine the situations that you run into on a regular basis, and it sounds like you've definitely had your share of work cut out for you. Thank you for sharing those very specific examples. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to offer on COVID or anything of that nature? Okay, I don't see any more questions from the group. So maybe just one final question before we prepare for our vigil, which is, how, in your opinion, I'm speaking to the panel members, do you feel that we can do the best outreach in prevention and actually working with people to help them? So whether it's prevention or active support, just wondered what your ideas are on the outreach strategies and interventions.
My go-to would always be education, Lisa, of course, naturally, but I appreciate the question on consent, and I appreciated Jen's response and how difficult it is to meet everyone's values in the education system. And with COVID, our teachers are more burdened and exhausted than ever before. And we were talking again before the program tonight about social services and psychiatrists and all the first responders. Everyone is so exhausted at the moment in terms of COVID. I'm so honored to be here tonight with this many people who care about this. So I'm not sure what the answer can be. Given the roots in American culture, I think social media could somehow be a good thing if we can figure it out, but I'm not for sure that it will be. I think it can be an educational tool that is free and accessible to everyone. So maybe that's something that we can look at, but we definitely need more funding. And I'm not for sure where that comes from either. So I have lots of questions, but I don't have any answers. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jen and Captain Tully have to say. And you as well, Lisa. I hope maybe you'll jump in on that too.
Well, I can share, I'm with you with the education and the idea of broadening and enhancing someone's world, even one extra system in a person's life to expand their support system and their life and their identity can be very powerful. And I think you hit on another important point, which was community building. So, creating these safety nets and also places for growth and risk taking for people. And, I think that comes through policy change as well. For example, looking at the differences between people recognizing verbal and emotional abuse versus physical abuse or physical sexual assault, and helping people understand that, there's service, there's support, and that it doesn't matter what category that the community wants us to heal, and serving through that education and differentiating the different needs, but coming together as a community, I think is so crucial. I'm with you. I don't think we can solve this definitely in 1 hour. We'd be really, really good, but these are opportunities for us to share our different ideas and expertise and different things in the community. So I don't know if either two of you want to give any further thoughts on that about outreach. I know that's a large question, but just anything that might come to mind about how to reach people or prevent.
Yeah, so I'm going to add to the chat. This is another tool from the Center for Disease Control, and it's called Connecting the Dots. And what I like about it is that you can look at the different risk factors and protective factors and also prevention strategies. And we use this tool to help start to target different populations or organizations serving particular populations to increase the likelihood that our information will get in their hands. So for example, substance misuse and addiction is a risk factor for a whole plethora of types of violence: sexual violence, domestic violence, adverse childhood experiences, childhood trauma. There's a lot of different ones there. And so we as an agency then think, okay, so a lot of folks who are going to need our services might be either criminally justice involved or they might struggle with addictions. We target recovery facilities, recovery community organizations, therapists, substance use counselors, parole officers, probation officers. It can start to give you a framework to think through how you target this, because it can be challenging, right? How do I reach out to the entire everybody? And that can be kind of overwhelming. So how we don't like that language. How we approach it as an organization is we say, okay, what are the risk factors? What are the protective factors? And so who are the people that are interacting with those different populations? And then we do outreach there, because getting our message, especially as, chronically under-resourced organization, like many social service agencies are, we have to rely on our community partners. So we say, okay, who are survivors most likely to interact with? It's law enforcement, it's prosecutors' offices, it's OBGYNs, it's child care facilities, it's counselors, it's therapists. And then we do outreach and make sure those folks have our materials, and that and hopefully survivors are interacting with those individuals and hopefully getting the resources that they need. So the CDC has a whole plethora of amazing resources in the prevention field, but I'll also add my email to the chat if anybody wants to reach out to me individually, if they want to chat any more about, engaging in prevention or response, in the area or whatever else. I'm happy. My prevention preference is showing, right? I'm very much like, not to disparage the social workers, President Clumpy included, but part of me is like, let's go upstream and stop people from ever experiencing the trauma in the first place. And so that's where I tend to like to focus my energies, in addition, of course, to always responding to folks, because that's what our crisis team does.
The only other thing I can add to that would be that I agree with prevention. Prevention's the way to, prevention and education are the ways to pursue this, I think, at least from my experience and where I've come from. And it's amazing to see the number of folks that are involved in violence, either at a young age or in early adulthood, that beget that to some extent in their families and their relationships, whether it's, romantic or otherwise. It's just, the longer I stay in this, the more I see that where it becomes generational, and that's a sad state of affairs. So the more we can prevent, the more we can educate. And I think you guys are doing an incredible job of that. So we're only just a really small piece of the pie, or the puzzle. So we definitely appreciate working with all of you guys to try to reach as many people as we can.
I appreciate that. And I think we tried to do our best to answer all the questions. I know we can continue communicating and speaking, and wanted to give another thank you to all of the participants and to the panel members who were kind enough to take time out of their important work to share their insights and their experience and their thoughts. To the survivors who shared their stories. Also wanted to say thank you so much to Jamie Brown, who was our host, who you don't really see or hear from at the moment, but who has been instrumental in putting together the technical part of this. And of course, Dr. Pam Kaler, who has been facilitating this event on campus for I don't know how many years. I'd probably get it wrong, but it's a significant amount. And just, you know, Pam, your capacity to take on this project and continue to encourage the cause, and even your individual work with women and how it impacts the society at large. And we appreciate all your effort over the years. So thank you again so much for being here. And I believe we are going to end this with a candlelight vigil, who I believe that our host is going to hook us up with. So again, thank you so much for your care and concern and participation. And I hope we can continue to process and work together. Thank you so much.